In a large and elegant house at the edge of the city, a young woman moved through the hallways with a quiet determination that came from years of hard work. The house was grand, with polished floors that reflected the light, streaming through enormous windows and walls decorated with expensive paintings. Every corner spoke of wealth, of lives lived in comfort and luxury, a world very different from the one she had grown up in. She was the maid of this household, a position she had accepted long ago, knowing that work of this kind required patience, resilience, and the ability to endure more than just physical labor. Her day started before the sun rose. The first task was always the same: wake before anyone else and prepare the house for the day ahead. She moved silently, careful not to wake the mistress, whose sleep was often deep and undisturbed, a stark contrast to the maid's own restless nights. She arranged the flowers in the hallway vase with meticulous care, dusted the surfaces until they shone, and checked every detail of the house. It was not just cleaning. It was maintaining the perfection expected by someone who had little patience for imperfection. The mistress, who was often dressed in the latest fashions, had a presence that filled the rooms before she even entered. She was elegant, poised, and very conscious of the impression she left on others. She loved to host parties, attend social gatherings, and always ensured that her appearance was flawless. Her hair was her pride, styled in intricate ways that required hours of effort. And she often commented on the hair of others, rarely kindly. For the maid, this had been one of the hardest parts of her job. Every morning, she had to stand by, enduring sharp remarks about her unstyled, her natural hair, while being expected to make the mistress look perfect. "Why can't you comb it properly?" the mistress would ask sharply, looking at the maid's hair with a mix of disdain and impatience. "It looks like a mess. You should take better care of yourself if you want to look presentable." The maid did not respond. She had learned early on that responding only led to further criticism. Instead, she focused on her work, moving her hands quickly but carefully, arranging the breakfast table, lighting the fireplace in winter, and making sure that the morning tea was served exactly as requested. Despite the harsh words, she maintained a quiet dignity, knowing that her worth was not defined by someone else's opinion. As the morning progressed, the mistress would move through the house, inspecting everything with a critical eye. She would lift cushions, glance at the silverware, and occasionally glance at the maid, as if expecting to find some hidden fault. The maid kept her head low, obeying every command without complaint. She had learned that patience was her strongest tool. People like the mistress often measured others only by appearance, failing to see the effort, care, and heart behind the actions that kept their lives running smoothly. The maid's own life outside the house was simple. She had a small room, barely furnished, where she slept on a thin mattress. Her clothes were modest, often hand-me-downs or carefully mended pieces that had to last her months. Yet despite the hardships, she carried herself with quiet strength. She took pride in her work because it was honest, and she found satisfaction in doing a job well. No amount of criticism could take away the sense of fulfillment she felt when a task was completed correctly, even if the mistress failed to acknowledge it. On this particular morning, the mistress was especially focused on her appearance. She had a gathering scheduled for that evening, a party where all the influential people in their social circle would be present. She spent hours before the mirror, arranging her hair, adjusting her makeup, and trying on different outfits. The maid assisted, offering the tools and holding up dresses as instructed, but the mistress's remarks were relentless. "This one makes me look too plain. Find something more glamorous," she said, tossing a dress aside. The maid quickly retrieved another option, careful to hide any frustration she felt at the endless demands. "And make sure my hair is perfect. It cannot look even a little messy tonight. Do you understand?" the mistress added, her voice sharp. The maid nodded silently, doing her best to meet the expectations. She had learned long ago that any sign of annoyance or resistance would be met with anger or ridicule. Even when her hands shook from exhaustion, she continued to work diligently, tying ribbons, pinning curls, and ensuring that every detail was exactly as the mistress desired. It was not an easy life, but she had grown accustomed to the rhythm of it, finding moments of quiet satisfaction in her competence and attention to detail, Despite the demanding work and constant criticism, the maid never allowed herself to lose her composure. She had seen others in her position break down, complain, or rebel, only to be met with harsher treatment. She understood that endurance was necessary, that strength came not from confrontation but from quiet perseverance. And so, she carried herself with a calm determination, her inner dignity shielding her from the constant barrage of judgment. As the morning moved into afternoon, the mistress left for errands, leaving the maid alone with the tasks that still needed attention. She moved through the rooms with care, folding linens, polishing silver, and preparing the house for the evening's gathering. The weight of the mistress's expectations was heavy, but she bore it silently, knowing that her effort, though unseen, was what made the household run smoothly. In those quiet moments, the maid often reflected on her own life. She remembered the struggles she had faced growing up, the times when food was scarce and comfort was a luxury she could not afford. She thought of her family, her dreams, and the simple joys she had learned to cherish. These memories gave her strength, reminding her that her value was not tied to the opinions of someone who could only see the surface. When the mistress returned, the maid greeted her with a polite smile, ready to continue her work. The mistress inspected the house briefly, offering quick, sharp comments about a pillow that was not perfectly aligned or a vase that had been slightly moved. The maid acknowledged each remark calmly, adjusting things as required, her movements precise and careful, even as the day wore on. And the maid felt the fatigue in her muscles. She did not complain. She had learned to find a sense of pride in her work, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she was capable, competent, and reliable. While the mistress valued only appearances, the maid understood that true strength lay in character and resilience, and in the ability to endure without bitterness. As the sun began to set, the maid prepared the house for the evening, arranging furniture, lighting candles, and ensuring that everything would be ready for the party. She moved efficiently, her mind focused on the tasks at hand, aware that soon the house would be filled with guests, laughter, and chatter. She was ready to serve, to assist, and to maintain the smooth functioning of the household, knowing that her work would be tested once the party began. And so, the maid continued her day, quietly enduring criticism, performing her duties with diligence, and holding on to her inner strength. She understood that her life was not defined by someone else's judgment, and that the respect she held for herself was far more important than the fleeting approval of the mistress. In this world of wealth, appearances, and social status, she had found her own quiet dignity, a strength that would carry her through the challenges yet to come. Even as the evening approached and the preparations for the grand party began, she remained steady, ready to face whatever the night would bring, knowing that her worth was built on resilience, patience, and unwavering integrity. The house was alive with movement as the afternoon shifted toward evening. The air smelled faintly of fresh polish, roses, and the faint hint of perfume that the mistress wore constantly. Today was especially important. The socialite had invited influential people from her circle for an evening gathering. She was obsessed with appearances as always, and nothing could be left to chance. Every hair, every dress, every accessory had to be perfect. The maid moved silently through the rooms, carrying trays of drinks and preparing for the arrival of the guests. Though she had seen countless parties over the years, each one felt like a delicate challenge. The mistress would scrutinize every detail, and the maid knew that a single imperfection could draw sharp criticism. She worked quickly but carefully, setting up the chairs, arranging the silverware, and adjusting the lighting to enhance the ambiance. Every step was deliberate, every motion precise. The mistress appeared in the drawing room, impeccably dressed, and immediately began pacing, examining her reflection in the mirrors. Her hair was styled in an intricate way, with curls and pins carefully arranged to convey elegance. She was clearly proud of the effort she had put into her appearance, and wanted the entire evening to reflect that. However, her pride came with a sharp edge. "Hold that tray higher. The glasses should not tilt even a little," she said, pointing to the maid with a critical gaze. "And your hair. Can't you do anything right? It looks so messy. Try harder." The maid lowered her eyes and nodded, silently correcting the tray and quickly adjusting her own hair with the small brush she kept tucked in her pocket. She had learned to move with grace under scrutiny, to anticipate the mistress's demands before they were spoken aloud. Over the years, she had developed an almost instinctive understanding of what needed to be done, and she executed each task with careful attention. Even if her efforts went unnoticed, the mistress was now turning her attention to the selection of her outfit. She had several dresses laid out on a chaise, each more elaborate than the last. The maid held them patiently, offering what was requested without complaint. The mistress tried on one dress, frowned, and then threw it aside. "This is too plain. Find something that makes me look taller, slimmer, more elegant," she commanded, her voice sharp. The maid retrieved another option, careful to keep her movements quiet and her expression neutral. She had learned that patience and discretion were her best tools. Any hint of annoyance or frustration would only draw further criticism. The mistress continued to fuss with her appearance, asking the maid to adjust the folds of her dress, smooth out wrinkles, and even fix the placement of her jewelry. Each request was made with a sense of urgency, as if the perfect image could be achieved only through relentless effort. The maid complied, moving quietly, her hands steady, despite the rising tension in the room as she worked. The maid could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She had spent years serving in this household, learning to navigate the mistress's moods and demands, yet each day brought new challenges. The mistress often judged her based on superficial qualities such as her hair or the simplicity of her clothing. Rather than acknowledging the skill and dedication with which she performed her duties, still, the maid endured, drawing strength from her inner sense of purpose and the quiet knowledge that her worth was not defined by someone else's opinion. The evening grew closer, and the house needed to be prepared for the influx of guests. The maid moved from room to room, placing candles in strategic spots, arranging flowers to create a welcoming atmosphere, and checking that each chair was perfectly aligned. She even polished the silverware again, knowing that any flaw would be noticed by the mistress. Her movements were precise, almost meditative, as she balanced the urgency of the preparations with the need for perfection. Meanwhile, the mistress grew increasingly impatient. She examined herself in the mirrors, adjusting her hair and makeup repeatedly, making small exacting changes. She criticized the maid's every movement, often speaking over her or dismissing her efforts. No, not like that. Hold the tray properly. Why is your hair falling forward? Don't you know how to braid it neatly? Despite the sharp words, the maid kept her composure. Responding only with silent compliance and careful actions, the maid also had to ensure that the appetizers and drinks were ready to be served at a moment's notice. She moved to the kitchen, checking the arrangements, plating small dishes, and making sure that each tray was balanced perfectly. She worked quickly, knowing that the guests could arrive at any moment, and the mistress would not tolerate any delay or mistake. Every plate, every glass, every detail mattered, and the maid performed her duties with a precision born from years of experience. As the first guests began to arrive, the maid guided them politely into the drawing room, offering drinks and making sure they were comfortable. The mistress entered shortly after, greeting each guest with a practiced smile, her attention still focused on her own image. She complimented herself in the mirrors, ensuring that every curl, every fold of fabric, and every accessory was perfectly in place. She spoke with confidence and charm, showing the world the elegance she so deeply valued. The maid remained in the background, quietly observing the scene. She had learned that the true power of her work was in its invisibility. When everything ran smoothly, she was almost unseen, but the impact of her effort was undeniable. She guided the guests seamlessly, refilled drinks without drawing attention, and anticipated the mistress's next instruction before it was given. Her presence was subtle, but it was the glue that held the evening together. Throughout the night, the mistress continued to criticize the maid, though now it was mingled with occasional praise when she was satisfied. "Good, now you're finally holding that tray correctly," she said, her tone sharp but momentarily approving. The maid accepted the brief acknowledgement without pride or complaint. Knowing that her satisfaction came from performing well, not from receiving approval, the maid also witnessed small moments that revealed the fragility behind the mistress's carefully constructed image. Despite the outward confidence and poise, there were moments when she hesitated, glanced nervously at the guests, or adjusted her hair and dress repeatedly. It was clear that the obsession with perfection came with its own burden, a constant pressure to maintain appearances that left little room for genuine comfort or ease. As the party progressed, the maid continued her duties with unwavering focus. She moved quietly through the crowd, offering assistance where needed, keeping an eye on details that others would overlook. She refilled glasses before they were empty, discreetly straightened furniture, and ensured that the atmosphere remained elegant and orderly. Her efforts went largely unnoticed, overshadowed by the spectacle of the mistress's appearance and the attention of the guests. Yet she continued with dedication and care. The evening was long, and the maid's fatigue grew, but she pressed on. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of these events, to the constant demands, and to the meticulous attention required to keep the house running smoothly. Every small task she completed was a testament to her patience, skill, and resilience, qualities that could not be measured by mere appearances. By the end of the night, the maid had navigated every challenge with quiet competence. The guests had departed, leaving the house once again in silence. She moved through the rooms, tidying up, storing dishes, and ensuring that everything was in order for the next day. The mistress, exhausted from the evening and satisfied with her performance, retreated to her private chambers, leaving the maid alone to reflect on the night's events. In those moments of solitude, the maid felt a sense of accomplishment. She had faced another day filled with criticism, high expectations, and relentless demands, yet she had endured with grace. She understood that her worth was built on her integrity, her patience, and her unwavering dedication. While the mistress measured value by appearances, the maid's true strength lay in her character, her ability to persevere, and the quiet pride she took in doing her work well as she prepared for bed. The maid allowed herself a brief moment of rest. Her hands were tired, her feet sore, but her spirit remained unbroken. She knew that the challenges of tomorrow would be no less demanding, but she also knew that she possessed the resilience to meet them. In a world obsessed with appearances, she had discovered the quiet power of diligence, patience, and inner strength, qualities that no criticism could diminish and no party could ever overshadow. The night had finally arrived, and the house was filled with soft, golden light, casting warm shadows along the polished floors and elaborate furniture. Outside, carriages and cars brought guests in elegant attire, their laughter and conversation already floating into the hallways. The mistress stood before the grand mirror in the drawing room, adjusting her gown and ensuring that every detail of her appearance was perfect. Her hair was styled into intricate curls, held in place by pins that shimmered under the lights. Her makeup highlighted every feature, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew the eyes of many were upon her. The maid, dressed simply but neatly, stood nearby, holding a tray of drinks for any arriving guest. Though she remained in the background, her presence was essential. She had prepared every corner of the house meticulously, arranged every flower, polished every surface, and ensured that the atmosphere was both welcoming and impressive. She knew that while the mistress captured attention with appearance and charm, the real work of the evening rested quietly in her hands. The first guests arrived. Stepping into the grand hall with admiration, they commented on the beauty of the interior, the freshness of the flowers, and the warm glow of the lighting. The maid greeted them politely, offering drinks and guiding them toward comfortable seating. Her movements were smooth and unobtrusive, allowing the guests to feel at ease without noticing the effort behind every small detail. Soon, the mistress entered the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. Heads turned, conversations paused, and the room seemed to brighten around her. She smiled, moving gracefully among the guests, engaging in light conversation and sharing laughter that sounded effortless. Every step, every gesture, every word was calculated to convey sophistication and elegance. She believed herself to be the center of attention, the person everyone admired and envied. As the evening progressed, the mistress continued to charm the guests. She complimented their attire, shared stories of her travels, and laughed at anecdotes that drew admiration from everyone present. The maid watched quietly, understanding that the mistress measured value in outward appearances. The conversations, the glances, the admiration, all of it was superficial, a display of status and refinement. Yet the maid moved among the guests as well, subtly ensuring that glasses were refilled, chairs remained perfectly aligned, and everything remained in order without drawing attention to herself. Despite the grandeur of the evening, the maid noticed small cracks beneath the surface. The mistress, despite her outward confidence, occasionally glanced nervously at a mirror, adjusted a curl that had shifted or fidgeted with her jewelry. Her laughter sometimes faltered, her smile seemed practiced, her posture tightened whenever she felt her perfection might be compromised. The maid understood that maintaining such an image required constant vigilance and that the burden of appearances could be exhausting. The party grew livelier, with guests mingling, sharing stories, and enjoying the elegant surroundings. The mistress floated among them, maintaining her carefully cultivated persona, while the maid moved silently through the background, anticipating needs before they were voiced. She offered drinks without being asked, noticed when a chair was slightly out of place, and discreetly corrected minor accidents before they became noticeable. Her presence was subtle, but the order and smooth functioning of the evening depended on her diligence. As the hours passed, the mistress continued to bask in the admiration of the guests, occasionally casting a glance at the maid, offering a quick remark or critique. "Make sure the trays are balanced properly. Don't let the glasses tilt," she said sharply, her tone a mixture of authority and impatience. The maid complied silently, adjusting the trays with precise care. Knowing that her work was essential, even if unacknowledged, the maid also observed the guests more closely. Some admired the mistress's appearance, others commented on the elegance of the house, but few noticed the effort behind the scenes. The maid's skill in creating a seamless experience went largely unrecognized, yet she continued her work with quiet pride. She understood that true competence did not require praise, and that the satisfaction of doing a job well was often its own reward. Throughout the evening, there were moments when the mistress's obsession with perfection became apparent. She would glance around the room, checking that every chair, every table, every decoration was in exactly the right place. She would adjust her gown, ensuring that the folds were perfectly aligned, or retouch her makeup subtly to maintain the illusion of flawlessness. The maid noticed these small anxieties. Understanding that the image of perfection the mistress projected was fragile and required constant maintenance, the maid continued to move discreetly through the crowd, her attention divided between guests, the mistress, and the many details that needed tending. She anticipated spills, corrected minor misplacements, and ensured that everyone was comfortable without drawing attention to herself. Her work was invisible, yet it was the foundation upon which the evening's success rested. The guests might admire the glamour and charm of the mistress, but it was the maid's diligence that held everything together seamlessly as the party reached its peak. The mistress became increasingly aware of her image, ensuring that every gesture, every word, and every expression contributed to the impression she wanted to make. She laughed at the right moments, shared compliments, maintained her composure, even as the demands of hosting grew more complex. The maid watched silently, moving like a shadow through the room, prepared to handle any unforeseen challenge without disrupting the flow of the evening. In the midst of the celebration, the maid also reflected on her own position. Though she was constantly judged for superficial qualities such as her hair and clothing, she had mastered the art of navigating these challenges with patience and skill. She understood the subtle power of discretion, the importance of competence, and the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she could handle anything that arose. While the mistress relied on appearances, the maid's strength lay in her ability to adapt, anticipate, and maintain order in a chaotic and demanding environment. As the night wore on, the house was filled with laughter, conversation, and the clinking of glasses. The guests were delighted. The mistress was pleased with the attention she received, and the atmosphere was lively and sophisticated. Behind the scenes, the maid continued her work tirelessly, moving from room to room, guiding guests, and maintaining the seamless functioning of the household. Every small act, every unnoticed adjustment, contributed to the overall success of the evening despite her exhaustion. The maid remained composed, aware that the evening was far from over. She had seen countless parties come and go, and each one presented its own challenges. Yet she had learned to navigate them with grace, patience, and quiet determination. Her inner strength allowed her to endure the criticisms, the high expectations, and the relentless demands placed upon her, all while performing her duties with competence and dignity. As the guests continued to enjoy themselves, the maid observed the contrast between the mistress's outward confidence and the subtle anxieties that occasionally surfaced. The mistress, so focused on perfection, had little awareness of the effort and skill required to create the smooth, elegant experience that her guests enjoyed. The maid understood that true value was not in appearances, but in the ability to handle challenges with grace, competence, and integrity. By the end of the evening, the party had reached its peak, with laughter and conversation filling every corner of the house. The mistress had succeeded in presenting herself as elegant and sophisticated, while the maid had ensured that everything ran seamlessly. Without drawing attention to the countless details that required constant vigilance, though largely unseen, the maid's role was indispensable, her quiet diligence forming the foundation upon which the evening's success rested. As the last guests prepared to leave, the maid guided them politely, offering drinks and ensuring that they departed comfortably. The mistress, satisfied with the evening and the admiration she received, retreated to her private chambers, leaving the maid to complete the final tasks of the night. She moved quietly through the rooms, tidying, storing trays, and checking that everything was in order for the following day. Her work was tireless, her dedication unwavering, and her sense of purpose intact. In the quiet moments after the party, the maid reflected on the evening. She had witnessed the mistress's obsession with perfection, the admiration of the guests, and the fragile nature of appearances. She understood that true strength lay not in outward display, but in competence, patience, and the ability to endure challenges with grace. Her work, though largely unseen, had been essential, and she carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had performed her duties with skill and dignity as she finally prepared to rest. The maid allowed herself a moment of reflection. The evening had been long and demanding, yet she had met every challenge with poise and resilience. She understood that the mistress measured value by appearances, while she measured her own by her ability to endure, adapt, and perform her duties with integrity. In a world obsessed with image, she had discovered the quiet power of diligence, patience, and inner strength, qualities that no amount of criticism could diminish and no party could ever overshadow. The night was at its peak, filled with music, laughter, and conversation that echoed through the grand halls of the house. The guests were enjoying themselves, exchanging compliments, telling stories, and admiring the mistress's elegance. She moved among them with practiced grace, smiling, laughing, and drawing attention effortlessly. Her image was flawless, or so she thought. Behind the confident facade, there was a fragile tension, a subtle worry that everything had to remain perfect, every detail in place. Every eye on her approval, the maid continued her work quietly, moving through the rooms like a shadow. She refilled drinks, straightened furniture, and ensured that trays were balanced perfectly. She anticipated spills before they happened and adjusted decorations that had shifted in the bustle of the evening. She remained calm and composed, aware that any mistake could be noticed immediately by the mistress. She worked not for praise, but because it was her duty and her integrity demanded it. The mistress, meanwhile, was obsessed with her own appearance. Every time she passed a mirror, she adjusted a curl or straightened a fold in her gown. She spoke effortlessly with guests, laughing at the right moments and offering compliments, all while keeping her composure under the pressure of perfection. But small cracks began to show. A guest's comment caused a faint crease of worry on her forehead. A glance at a mirror revealed a hair slightly out of place. These tiny imperfections, unnoticed by most, weighed heavily on her suddenly. In the midst of the lively evening, an incident occurred. A waiter carrying a tray slipped slightly, spilling a bit of wine toward the mistress. Reacting quickly, she tried to step aside gracefully, but the edge of her gown caught on a chair. In the blink of an eye, her carefully styled hair, arranged over hours, began to collapse. Pins fell out. Curls loosened. The elegant image she had cultivated so meticulously started to unravel. The room fell silent for a brief moment. The guests gasped, some hiding smiles, others concerned about her reaction. The mistress's face went pale. She reached to adjust her hair, but the damage was already visible. The carefully constructed image of sophistication and control she had maintained so fiercely was slipping, and she felt a wave of embarrassment and panic. The maid, who had been nearby, noticed immediately. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, offering help with a calm and steady presence. She adjusted the fallen curls, carefully pinned the hair back, and smoothed out the gown, all the while speaking softly and reassuringly. Her movements were precise, graceful, and unassuming, a stark contrast to the mistress's flustered state. Guests began to notice the maid's quiet skill, the way she managed the situation with dignity and competence. Bringing order to a moment of chaos, the mistress tried to regain composure, forcing a smile, but it was clear that she was shaken. The admiration she had relied upon throughout the evening was replaced with a mixture of surprise, concern, and amusement from the guests. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that appearances could be fragile, that perfection could be disrupted in a single instant, and that her own pride and vanity could crumble in the face of unexpected events. The maid continued to work discreetly, supporting the mistress without drawing attention to herself. She adjusted the hair, ensured the gown was in place, and offered gentle words of encouragement. Her calm presence provided a stabilizing force in the room, allowing the mistress to recover just enough to continue interacting with the guests. The contrast was clear. While the mistress had relied entirely on appearance and image, the maid relied on skill, patience, and composure. The guests, now more attentive, began to recognize the maid's quiet competence. Some whispered among themselves, noting how smoothly she had handled the situation, how she had stepped in without hesitation, and how her calm demeanor restored order. In that moment, the maid's worth became visible, not through words or self-promotion, but through action and character. The elegance she demonstrated was not in outward beauty, but in the ability to navigate difficulty with grace and intelligence. The mistress, still aware of the disruption, felt a humbling shift. She had always measured herself against others, relying on appearances and social approval, but she could see now that true elegance was more than superficial beauty. The maid had shown resilience, calm, and skill qualities the mistress had overlooked and undervalued. It was a quiet revelation, one that unsettled her. Yet it carried a powerful lesson about humility and the true nature of worth. As the evening continued, the mistress struggled to regain the effortless charm she had maintained earlier. She laughed more tentatively, moved with slightly less ease, and seemed more conscious of her image. The guests, though polite, noticed the change and exchanged subtle glances. The power of appearance had faltered, and the reality of human vulnerability had become apparent. Meanwhile, the maid remained steady, ensuring that every detail of the evening proceeded without further incident. Throughout the remainder of the party, the maid's quiet influence was felt. She managed small mishaps before they became noticeable, guided guests without intrusion, and supported the mistress as she regained composure. Her presence was steady, reliable, and indispensable, yet she continued to operate without seeking recognition. The lesson was subtle, but powerful. True value and capability often go unnoticed, yet they shape the outcomes of every important moment. By the end of the evening, the mistress was exhausted. The guests had departed, the laughter and chatter fading into silence, leaving the grand house quiet once more. The maid moved through the rooms, tidying up, storing trays, and ensuring that everything was in place for the next day. Her work was methodical, thorough, and performed with quiet pride, demonstrating her enduring commitment and inner strength in the stillness after the party. The mistress reflected on what had occurred. She recognized the fragility of appearances and the fleeting nature of admiration based solely on image. She saw, perhaps for the first time, the quiet competence, patience, and resilience of the maid she had often dismissed. The realization was humbling, a reminder that true elegance and strength were measured not by outward appearance but by character, skill, and the ability to maintain grace under pressure. The maid, unaware of the internal reflections of the mistress, prepared herself for rest. Her body was tired, but her spirit remained resilient. She understood the value of patience, the importance of humility, and the quiet power of competence. In a world that celebrated appearances, she had discovered a deeper truth. The strength of character and the ability to endure with dignity were far more enduring than the fleeting praise of others. As the night ended, the house returned to its peaceful state. The lessons of the evening lingered quietly in the air, invisible yet profound. The mistress had faced the unexpected, experienced a moment of vulnerability, and witnessed the true worth of someone she had overlooked. The maid had performed her duties flawlessly, demonstrating that strength, patience, and skill could quietly command respect and admiration without the need for recognition or acclaim. In the silence of the empty house, the maid allowed herself a moment of reflection. The night had been long, challenging, and humbling in ways that were not visible to most. Yet she had maintained her composure, fulfilled her duties, and upheld her own sense of integrity. She understood that life often teaches lessons through unexpected moments, and that true elegance, true value, and true strength were revealed not in perfection, but in the ability to act with grace, competence, and quiet dignity when circumstances demanded it. The air in the grand house was thick with soft music and the low murmur of departing guests as the evening drew to a close. The mistress, still recovering from the embarrassing incident, sat quietly in the drawing room, smoothing her gown and touching her hair that had only partially regained its intended shape. She had managed to regain some composure, but a lingering sense of vulnerability and unease remained. The carefully constructed image she had depended upon so much had faltered, revealing the fragility beneath the elegance she projected. The maid, ever attentive and composed, moved to the mistress's side without being asked. She had already anticipated the challenges that would follow the unexpected collapse of the hairstyle and the small accidents that had occurred during the party. She had acted with calmness and precision, ensuring that the situation did not escalate further. And now she was there to provide steady support as the evening concluded. "You should sit here while I arrange the rest of the room," the maid said softly, her voice gentle and reassuring. There was no hint of judgment or superiority in her tone. She simply spoke with quiet authority, the kind that comes from experience and confidence in one's abilities. The mistress allowed herself to lean back, grateful for the support yet embarrassed by the reliance she had been forced to place on someone she had often dismissed. She watched as the maid moved with deliberate care, smoothing the edges of the gown, repositioning fallen decorations, and ensuring that the room returned to its impeccable state. The skill and patience the maid exhibited were unmistakable, and for the first time, the mistress saw the depth of her competence. The maid worked with an almost invisible grace, attending to the details that could have easily been overlooked. She straightened cushions, adjusted lighting, and checked that every glass and plate was stored correctly. Her hands moved swiftly but carefully, ensuring that the elegance of the house was restored without drawing attention to her actions. Every movement reflected dedication, skill, and an unspoken understanding of the household's needs. Throughout the process, the mistress observed quietly, a mixture of humility, embarrassment, and admiration stirring within her. She realized that the maid's calm presence had been the anchor during the chaos, the steady hand that had prevented a minor disaster from becoming a spectacle. The mistress, who had once looked down on the maid's appearance and hair, began to understand that true elegance was not measured by outward beauty alone, but by the ability to act with competence, poise, and reliability when circumstances demanded it. The maid, noticing the subtle change in the mistress's demeanor, continued to offer practical assistance. She adjusted the pins in the gown, ensuring that the folds were smooth and aligned, and checked the hair once more, using gentle, expert touches to bring some semblance of order back to the once pristine style. The mistress watched silently, aware that she had underestimated the skill and value of someone she had treated with condescension for so long. As the house gradually emptied, the maid moved with quiet efficiency to ensure that everything was in its proper place. She straightened the furniture, polished the silverware once more, and arranged the remaining trays of food and drinks neatly. Each task was completed with meticulous attention, demonstrating the kind of care and responsibility that the mistress had rarely acknowledged. The contrast between the mistress's reliance on appearance and the maid's reliance on skill and diligence was now undeniable. The mistress finally spoke, her voice soft and reflective. I didn't realize how much work goes into keeping everything
perfect.
You handled tonight better than I could have imagined. There was hesitation in her words, a recognition that she had misjudged the value of the maid's contributions. The maid simply nodded, maintaining her calm demeanor. She did not seek praise, but the acknowledgement itself carried weight, as it came from someone who had rarely appreciated her efforts. The maid's presence continued to guide the mistress through the aftermath of the party. She helped her to her chambers, assisted in removing the accessories that had become slightly tangled, and ensured that the room was orderly for the next day. The mistress, for the first time, experienced a sense of humility, realizing that the skill, patience, and integrity of the maid had been a crucial part of the evening's success. During this quiet time, the mistress reflected on her own behavior. She remembered the countless times she had criticized the maid's hair, clothing, and appearance, failing to recognize the skill, resilience, and dedication that the maid had demonstrated consistently. The lessons of the evening were becoming clear. Outward appearance was fragile, easily disrupted, and often relied upon recognition from others, whereas true competence and character endured through challenges and remained invaluable. Even when unnoticed, the maid, continuing her duties with understated grace, sensed the shift in the mistress's understanding. She did not interrupt the process with words of correction or guidance. Her actions alone conveyed the necessary lesson. The mistress could observe and reflect, recognizing the disparity between superficial judgment and the real strength of diligence, patience, and inner resolve. As the night deepened, the final details of the house were attended to. The maid ensured that every candle was extinguished safely. Every dish was stored and the rooms were returned to a state of calm and order. Her movements were quiet, methodical, and precise. Each step a demonstration of her unwavering commitment to the household. The mistress, now sitting quietly, absorbed the scene and began to comprehend the depth of the lesson before her. The maid's calm, composed demeanor in the face of the evening's challenges had left a lasting impression. The mistress, who had relied entirely on appearance and charm to command attention, realized that these traits alone were insufficient. The true measure of worth and capability lay in resilience, skill, and the ability to act with integrity and composure when circumstances demanded it. The maid's quiet competence had not only salvaged the evening, but had revealed a profound truth about character, patience, and inner strength. For the first time, the mistress understood that her previous judgments had been superficial, that she had undervalued someone whose contributions were both essential and exemplary. She felt a mixture of humility, regret, and newfound respect. The incident had provided a powerful lesson, one that would remain with her beyond the confines of the party, the elegant rooms of the house. As the maid completed her final tasks, the mistress finally spoke again, this time with sincerity. I see now how much of what you do goes unnoticed, yet it is so important. I have judged you wrongly all these years. There was no pretension in her voice, only the quiet acknowledgement of a truth that had been revealed through circumstance and observation. The maid accepted the statement with calm dignity, understanding that the lesson was not just for the mistress, but a reflection of the values she herself upheld: patience, skill, and quiet resilience. The house now settled into silence, the soft glow of candles fading as the night progressed. The mistress, humbled and contemplative, began to grasp the significance of the evening. She had experienced vulnerability, witnessed the limits of appearances, and observed the strength of someone she had once underestimated. The maid's actions had quietly guided the night, demonstrating the enduring power of competence, patience, and grace. In those quiet hours, the mistress reflected on the ways she had treated the maid in the past. The sharp words and judgments that had been based solely on superficial qualities. She understood that her vanity and preoccupation with image had blinded her to the real value of character and skill. The evening had been a revelation, a moment of humility that would alter her perspective and behavior going forward. The maid, meanwhile, allowed herself a brief moment of rest. Satisfied with the completion of her duties, her body was tired, but her sense of purpose and inner strength remained intact. She had managed the evening with composure, skill, and integrity, and in doing so, had demonstrated the quiet, enduring value of true competence. She understood that life often taught lessons through unexpected circumstances, and that patience, resilience, and quiet action could reveal truths more profound than any outward display of elegance. The night ended with the house returning to its serene state. The mistress, humbled and contemplative, had witnessed firsthand the importance of inner strength and the limitations of superficial appearances. The maid, steadfast and skilled, had ensured the success of the evening through her quiet diligence and composure. The lessons of the night were clear, and the transformation of understanding between them had begun, paving the way for respect, humility, and recognition that transcended appearance and image. The morning after the party brought with it a quiet stillness. The sun filtered gently through the large windows of the grand house, casting soft light on the polished floors and delicate furnishings. The events of the previous night lingered in the air, though outwardly, everything appeared calm and orderly. The mistress, who had faced an unexpected moment of vulnerability, sat quietly in her chambers, reflecting on what had transpired. For the first time, she considered the depth of her own behavior and the value of those she had long overlooked. The maid moved through the rooms with the same quiet diligence as always, carrying out the morning tasks with precision and care. Though she had performed these duties countless times, the events of the night had subtly shifted the dynamics between her and the mistress. The silence between them was no longer tense or filled with criticism. It was thoughtful, reflective, charged with the potential for change. The mistress observed the maid as she worked, noting the grace and efficiency in each movement. Every action, from adjusting curtains to polishing silverware, was carried out with care, patience, and competence. The mistress realized that she had spent years focusing on appearances and outward charm, failing to recognize the quiet strength, dedication, and skill that sustained the very household she prided herself on. It was a humbling revelation, one that filled her with a mixture of regret and admiration. As the day progressed, the mistress attempted to engage with the maid differently. She spoke more gently, her tone less commanding and more collaborative. She asked questions about the work, inquired about the proper care of certain items, and listened as the maid provided clear, knowledgeable responses. The maid answered patiently, demonstrating not just her competence, but also her understanding of the delicate change in their relationship. The mistress reflected on her previous judgments and criticisms. Realizing how often she had belittled the maid over superficial matters such as her hair, clothing, or demeanor, she now understood that these judgments had been unfair and shallow, blind to the true value and capability that the maid possessed. There was a newfound respect growing within her, a recognition that true worth was measured not by appearance but by integrity, skill, and resilience throughout the day. Small moments continued to reinforce the lesson learned. The mistress tried to manage a minor household task herself, only to struggle with details that the maid handled effortlessly. Watching this, she gained a deeper appreciation for the maid's skill and composure. Understanding that competence and patience often required years of experience and quiet dedication. She saw the limitations of her reliance on charm and appearance and recognized that the real strength lay in those who could act decisively and skillfully when circumstances demanded it. The maid, aware of the subtle shift in the mistress's perspective, continued her work with calm composure. She did not boast or demand recognition, but her actions spoke volumes. Each perfectly executed task, each gentle correction. And each moment of guidance served as a reminder that true strength was found in diligence, humility, and steady competence. The mistress, observing all of this, felt both humbled and inspired. By the afternoon, the mistress made a conscious effort to change her behavior. She began offering genuine acknowledgement and appreciation for the maid's work, expressing gratitude in a manner she had rarely done before. The maid accepted the appreciation with quiet dignity, understanding that the recognition was meaningful, but not the measure of her value. The moment marked a turning point in their relationship, establishing mutual respect and understanding that had previously been absent. Over the following days, the mistress continued to apply the lessons she had learned. She refrained from unnecessary criticism, sought advice from the maid, and allowed herself to rely on her experience and skill. In return, the maid provided guidance and support, fostering a sense of teamwork and shared purpose. The household, once tense with hierarchical judgment, began to feel more harmonious, efficient, and balanced. The transformation extended beyond daily tasks. The mistress became more thoughtful and considerate in her interactions with others. Recognizing that outward appearances were fleeting and superficial judgments could harm relationships, she observed the maid's patience, composure, and resilience as a model for her own behavior, learning that humility and respect were far more valuable than vanity and pride. The lessons of the night continued to resonate, shaping a deeper understanding of what true elegance and worth entailed. The maid, meanwhile, continued to perform her duties with unwavering dedication. Her competence, patience, and quiet strength had proven essential, not just for the functioning of the household, but for imparting a profound lesson about humility and character. She understood that recognition was secondary to the fulfillment that came from doing her work well and maintaining her own integrity. The events of the party had highlighted this truth, demonstrating that true influence and respect often arise quietly, through consistent, skillful action. In time, the mistress's attitude towards the maid transformed completely. She no longer measured value based on appearance, hair, or clothing. She came to understand that respect, skill, patience, and integrity were far more important than the superficial standards she had once clung to. Their relationship shifted from one of judgment and hierarchy to one of mutual understanding, trust, and quiet admiration. This change did not happen overnight, but it was steady and sincere. The mistress learned to approach her own life with more humility, valuing people for their character rather than their outward appearance. The maid, in turn, continued her work with the same dedication, now met with genuine acknowledgement and respect. Together, they created a household environment that was not only efficient, but also marked by understanding and appreciation. The lessons learned from that night became lasting principles. The mistress had experienced firsthand the fragility of appearances and the enduring power of skill, patience, and integrity. She had learned that true elegance was not in superficial perfection, but in the ability to handle challenges with composure and grace. The maid had demonstrated that quiet diligence, resilience, and competence could teach profound lessons without words or recognition. In the weeks and months that followed, the mistress continued to reflect on the events of the party and the role the maid had played. She carried the lesson into all aspects of her life, approaching interactions with greater empathy, humility, and thoughtfulness. The maid remained a steady presence, her strength and skill a model of quiet excellence. Together, they navigated the household with a sense of balance, respect, mutual appreciation that had been absent before. The story concluded not with dramatic fanfare, but with subtle, enduring change. The mistress's vanity and judgment had been humbled, and she had learned to value character over appearance. The maid's quiet strength had been recognized, and her actions had demonstrated the importance of patience, skill, and dignity. Their lives, once marked by hierarchical judgment and superficial assessments, were now guided by respect, understanding, and the profound realization that true worth is revealed in action, resilience, and integrity. As the house settled into its daily rhythm, the lessons of the past night remained embedded in every task and interaction. The mistress, transformed by humility and insight, approached her life with a new perspective. The maid, steadfast and skilled, continued to embody the values that had guided her throughout her life: patience, competence, and quiet strength. Together, they shared a renewed understanding of the importance of character, the fragility of appearances, and the enduring impact of respect, diligence, and integrity in shaping meaningful relationships and a harmonious life.